You're not even her real granddaughter. My father, Reed Ashbourne, didn't speak so much as detonate, each word a shard of glass. His face twisted into something predatory and unfamiliar. Only blood relatives deserve the Ashbourne fortune. I didn't move. Couldn't. Grandmother Isolde's study pressed in on me. Oaken shelves crammed with leather-bound classics, the smoky scent of old paper and polish, the ancestral portrait glaring down from above the fireplace like a judge who'd already made up her mind. 3 days since we put her in the ground, and here we were, clawing each other to pieces over a will no one had even read. What are you talking about? I asked. My voice sounded small against the thundering in my chest. Don't play innocent, Marina. He savored my name like it offended him. Your mother's little secret isn't a secret anymore. Reed paced the oriental rug, throwing a hateful glance at Isolde's formal portrait, as if she were the architect of his misery. Isolde had been obsessed with lineage charts, diaries, tree after family tree. Reed loved to quote her obsession like scripture. Once the attorney confirms you're not Ashbourne blood, you'll get nothing. He squared his shoulders, chin lifted at that imperious angle I'd known since childhood. Do you promise to keep your word about this? I asked, forcing steel into my tone. That only blood relatives deserve grandmother's inheritance? Absolutely. He didn't flinch. I'll make sure the legacy stays with real Ashbournes, not imposters. My name is Marina Ashbourne. I'm 27, and until 5 minutes ago, I believed the man sneering at me was my biological father. Now, in my grandmother's Georgian mansion outside Philadelphia, I was apparently learning the opposite. All I wanted was fairness, what Isolde intended. She had named me specifically in our last conversation about her estate. Standing in my way was the man who had spent my entire life measuring me and finding me wanting. You can attend the will reading next week if you must, Reed said, dismissing me with a flick of his gaze. But don't expect anything. I've already spoken with Colby Harrington, his loyal friend and the family attorney. The word collusion floated up like smoke. We'll challenge any provision that includes you. I'll be there, I said, quiet but steady. Grandmother wanted me there. Sentiment, he scoffed. Isolde always had a blind spot for you. Fortunately, the law cares about facts. He strode out, trailing the stink of arrogance. I sank into Isolde's desk chair and ran my fingers over the polished walnut where she had signed deals, written letters, and recently finalized her will. My phone buzzed. From Mom. We need to talk about your father. Tonight. Alone. I slid down my spine. If Reed wasn't my biological father, then who was? How did anyone keep a secret like that for 27 years? And why drag it into daylight now of all times? Growing up Ashbourne meant marble hallways and iron expectations. Pharmaceuticals and shrewd investments had padded the family for 3 generations. Reed, the elder son, had always been tagged the heir. His younger brother, Dr. Julian Ashbourne, was the family's brilliant heretic. Seattle Labs, rare appearances at holidays, laughter that made everything feel lighter. My memories of him were warm in a way Reed's never were. Reed measured worth in trophies and titles. My brothers hit his marks on cue. Evan stepped into the business, Miles crushed law school. I launched a career in historical preservation, graduated with honors, won grants, and still heard him mutter to my mother when he thought I couldn't hear. She lacks the Ashbourne drive. Too soft. Too unfocused. Isolde had been the antidote. Tea on Sundays, stories of the women in our line who bent rules until they broke. A mantra she'd repeat with that wry smile. An Ashbourne makes her own path, Marina. Then she died at 86 peacefully, and the house felt colder than winter. After the funeral, I noticed Reed watching me with surgical scrutiny. Hush talks with Colby cut off when I walked in. I blamed grief, told myself I was imagining things. But the last time I saw Isolde, she gripped my hand and whispered, "Trust your instincts, my girl. Not everything is what it seems." I chalked it up to medication. Now it felt like a map. I met Mom at her favorite hidden cafe. The kind of place where nobody cared that your last name could open or close doors. She looked smaller, hair slightly out of place, eyes bruised by sleepless nights. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "I never wanted you to find out like this," she said, twisting her wedding band. "Reed was cruel." "So it's true?" I asked. "He's not my biological father?" She nodded, tears brightening but not falling. It's complicated. More complicated than he makes it sound. Over an hour she unspooled my life, and then rewound it with different colors. She and Julian had been in love before Reed ever entered the frame, young and fierce, planning a future, right up until Julian won a research fellowship in Seattle. They tried distance. Distance tried them back. I leaned on Reed, she said, shame in the crease of her mouth, for 5 minutes longer than I should have. Then I ended it. My heart was still with Julian. She found out she was pregnant. The timing matched Julian's last visit home. I was certain you were his child, she whispered. But Reed insisted you were his. Julian was engaged by then. I didn't want to blow up his life. Reed proposed immediately, white knight. Perfect story, perfect timing. I thought I was choosing stability for you, Mom said. I didn't realize I was becoming leverage in someone else's inheritance game. The Ashbourne Trust. Strict provisions, male heirs, legitimate children. A chessboard masquerading as a family tree. I sat there, fist around my water glass, staring at a life I suddenly didn't recognize. Reed's frostbite. Julian's warmth. Isolde's extra softness with me. Puzzle pieces clicked into a picture too obvious to ignore. Does Julian know? I asked. No, she said, small and fierce at once. I couldn't risk wrecking his marriage. And then the years gathered like dust. Why is Reed revealing it now? I pressed, though I already knew. Isolde's will, Mom said, jaw hardening. He's obsessed with the fortune. If he paints you as not Ashbourne blood, he thinks he can erase you. But if I'm not Reed's, you are an Ashbourne by blood, she cut in. Just not his. You are Julian's daughter. She held my gaze. Which makes you Isolde's biological granddaughter, no matter how Reed spins it. The irony was so sharp I almost laughed. Reed's weapon might be our shield. What do I do? The truth felt like standing on a dock with the boards coming loose. That depends on what you want, she said. Justice? Acknowledgement? Or simply what Isolde intended for you? I didn't know, not yet. But I knew this. I wouldn't let Reed rewrite my life for a payout. The next morning I drove to Julian's apartment with my pulse banging against my ribs. I'd called ahead. Family matters before the will reading. And now sat in his modest living room, ringed by scientific journals and souvenirs from conferences in cities I couldn't pronounce. He handed me tea. At 58, he had the same dark eyes that looked back at me from mirrors. Seeing them on his face did something to my lungs. You seem troubled, he said gently. Is Reed making things difficult about Isolde's estate? It's more complicated than that. I swallowed and the words tasted like cliff's edge. Did you and my mother, before she married Reed, were you together? The cup paused halfway to his mouth. Surprise flickered into caution. Why ask that now? Because Reed told me he isn't my biological father, I said. And he's using it to push me out of the will. That sounds like Reed, Julian said, voice turning flat. Calculating even in cruelty. He studied my face the way a scientist studies a result that both confirms and terrifies. What did your mother say? I told him everything. Nostalgia and pain moved behind his eyes. Then something softer, hope, maybe refusing to be reasonable. I never knew, he said at last, voice rough. Your mother didn't tell me she was pregnant. By the time I learned of her marriage, it was done. He leaned forward. Marina, are you saying you believe I might be your father? The timing fits, I said. And Reed is already filing motions with Colby to sideline me. Julian's expression darkened with a conviction so calm it felt like a verdict. Isolde named you. Reed can't bully you out of a testament. He can try, I said. He is trying. Then we need the truth. He set the cup down. A DNA test settles this. No more speculation. Clinical. Terrifying. Right. You do it. I asked, and my voice betrayed me. A tremor caught under the question. Without hesitation, he said, the answer immediate, unadorned. I've always felt a pull I couldn't explain. If you are my daughter. He stopped himself, breathed. Let's confirm the facts. We arranged for an expedited test that afternoon with a private lab. Hush quiet, white glove, 72 hours for results. As the technician sealed our samples, dread and relief braided in my stomach. That night I called Isolde's personal attorney, Arthur Pennington. The one who wasn't in Reed's pocket. I can't discuss provisions before the reading, he said kindly. But I can assure you Isolde was clear-minded and intentional. When I asked point-blank whether Isolde had suspected the truth about my parentage, his polite mask slipped for a heartbeat. Miss Ashbourne, your grandmother was perceptive. Very little escaped her. Translation: she knew. Minutes later, a courier dropped a letter from Colby Harrington's office. Petition to delay the will reading pending identity concerns regarding purported beneficiaries. Reed was building walls while we were still drawing a map. And because fate has a dark sense of humor, I learned Arthur had been suddenly hospitalized with pneumonia. My best ally removed from the board right on schedule. Mom called, voice shook. Reed knows you met Julian. He's livid, Marina. Be careful. When he's cornered, he's dangerous. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, counting the seconds between my breaths. In 72 hours, the lab would send me an answer that could detonate this family, or finally put it back on its hinges. And if Reed wanted to make it a blood test, then fine. We would make it a blood test. The results landed in my inbox like a gavel strike. Probability of paternity: 99.99998%. Julian Ashbourne was unequivocally my biological father. I read the sentence 3 times, each pass rearranging my past. Birthdays with frost at the edges, holidays where laughter stopped at Reed's side of the table, that ache I couldn't name when Julian spoke to me like my thoughts mattered. Vindication burned hot. Grief came colder. This wasn't a theory anymore. It was data. I called Julian. He answered on the first ring. It's conclusive, I said, voice unsteady despite myself. A silence soft and reverent. I suspected the moment you asked, he admitted. You have your mother's smile. But those eyes, Isolde's eyes. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. We'll go to the reading together. For the first time in days, the ground felt less like water. Then the trap snapped. Colby Harrington summoned me to his office with the unctuous politeness of a maitre d' at a restaurant that doesn't want your business. The firm's lobby smelled like leather and old favors. Colby's smile was lacquered. His eyes were knives. Marina, I thought we could discuss a graceful resolution, he said, sliding a document across the desk. A waiver relinquishing any claim to Isolde's estate in exchange for $250,000. Enough to insult me, not enough to buy me. This is absurd, I said, pushing it back. My grandmother named me. She named you as Reed's daughter, he countered smoothly. Now that we know I'm Julian's daughter, I cut in. I'm even more plainly Isolde's blood. Isn't that the scripture you and Reed are suddenly praying to? Blood. His smile thinned. There are nuances in the trust. Complexities that supersede simple biology. What complexities? I'm not at liberty to preview the reading. He steepled his fingers. Reed is prepared to be aggressive. Veiled threat received. I stood. Tell him I'm prepared to be accurate. Colby's gaze sharpened. And tell me, how did your expedited DNA test go? My heart misfired. How do you know about that? He looked delighted to have drawn blood without moving. Reed is very resourceful. I left with my jaw set so tight it ached. On the sidewalk, the city felt too bright, too busy. As if everyone else had been told their lives were real, while I was still waiting for mine to be validated by paperwork. By morning the board flipped again. Julian called, his voice tempered steel. An old friend reached out. A retired nurse who worked with our family's physician decades ago. Marina. Reed was adopted as an infant. He paused, letting it land. Our parents hid it after multiple miscarriages. My unexpected arrival years later didn't erase the pain that came before. The room tilted. I gripped the counter. Does Reed know? I don't think so. Isolde did. Papers rustled on his end. The Ashbourne Trust requires blood descendants of our great-grandfather, Silas Ashbourne, for principal inheritance. Adoption protected Reed legally. But if he insists on a biological standard, he may have disqualified himself. The irony was so savage it almost tasted sweet. Reed had sharpened the blade and then handed it to us. We have records. I asked. I'm looking at certified copies, Julian said. Birth registry, private adoption filings, contemporaneous notes. It's enough to force the conversation. I pictured Reed's face when the ground beneath him finally admitted it never belonged to him. Then I pictured the boy he had once been. Brought home to parents who wanted him so badly, they wrapped a secret around him like a blanket. Compassion flickered and then went out. He'd spent my life weaponizing blood. He didn't get mercy for discovering he had none to spend. The day of the will reading arrived dressed in cold sunlight. Isolde's mansion glowed with autumn, maples flaring red beyond the windows. The family gathered at the long dining table that had seen more arguments than meals. Evan and Miles flanking Reed, their expressions taut. My mother beside me, fingers laced with mine under the table. A small constellation of cousins and aunts pretending they weren't starving for spectacle. At the head sat Colby, leather portfolio open like a stage curtain. "Before we begin," he said, voice carrying the smugness of a man who believes he's rehearsed every line, "we must address a delicate matter of succession eligibility. As you know, certain assets are governed by the Ashbourne Family Trust, established by Silas Ashbourne, which requires beneficiaries to be blood descendants." Reed straightened, confidence radiating off him like heat. He flicked me a look that said checkmate. "Which is why we must discuss Marina's status," he said smoothly. "Recent information confirms she is not my biological child. Under the trust, she is not a blood Ashbourne." He slid a folder toward Colby. "Independent DNA analysis confirms it." Cold rage climbed my throat. "May I ask how you obtained my DNA?" I kept my voice level by force. Reed's smile was all teeth. "Your water glass. Family dinner. Astonishing what people leave behind." Julian's chair scraped. "That's illegal," he snapped. "Unauthorized genetic testing." "Legally messy," Colby conceded without looking up, "but scientifically probative. The result stands." For a beat, my carefully built plan tottered. If Colby framed my test as exclusion and ignored method, Reed would control the narrative. But we had another script. "I have evidence as well," I said, sliding our own report forward. "DNA confirming that Julian Ashbourne is my father." The room fractured, gasps, murmurs, the scrape of silver on wood. Reed's mask slipped. Something raw and ugly writhed across his face before he strangled it back into composure. Colby scanned, frowned. "This complicates matters. Only if you pretend the trust says Reed's blood instead of Silas Ashbourne's blood," Julian said, voice gone physician calm, the tone that turns emergencies into tasks. "And if we're applying a blood standard, we should ensure we're applying it consistently." Reed barked a laugh that sounded like a snapped cable. "What are you implying?" Julian stood, spine straight, and set another folder on the table with the gentleness of a bomb disposal tech. "That you were adopted as an infant, Reed. That Isolde knew. That the trust's biological language, weaponized by you, excludes you." The silence was violent. Every molecule of air seemed to stop and listen. "That is a lie," Reed said finally, each word a flung brick. "Slander." "It is documentation," Julian replied, implacable. "Birth registry cross-reference. Private adoption filings. A physician's note written in our father's hand. If you insist on purity tests, you should be first in line." Colby's color drained as he flipped pages that were a century old and 5 seconds deadly. The cousins were stone. Evan's knuckles whitened. Miles stared at the centerpiece like it could save him. "I won't allow this farce," Reed snarled, half rising. "You already allowed it," I said quietly. "The moment you declared that only blood mattered." The doors to the library opened. A hush rolled through the room. Arthur Pennington stood there, frail, upright, alive, leaning on a cane like a scepter. "Pneumonia my foot." He surveyed the faces, then the folders, then me. Something like pride softened his mouth. "My apologies for the delay," he said, moving to the head of the table with the unhurried authority of a man who has never run for anyone. "I am here at Isolde's express instruction. Before Mr. Harrington proceeds, there is a sealed letter I've been directed to read if questions of lineage arise." Colby started to object. Arthur lifted a hand. The objection died. He set an envelope on the table. Cream paper, the Ashbourne crest pressed into wax. Broke the seal and began to read. "To my family, gathered in my house." The room leaned forward as one body. Reed's jaw clenched. My heart steadied. At last, it was Isolde's turn to speak. Arthur's voice filled the room. "Dry paper, wet truth. To my family, gathered in my house. If this letter is being read, then the secret I chose not to trumpet was forced into the open. I have always known that Reed came to us by adoption after a string of heartbreaks, and I have always known, from the first time I held her, that Marina is Julian's child. A grandmother knows her own blood. Reed's chair creaked. No one breathed. The Ashbourne Trust, Silas's iron contraption, requires blood descendants for principal inheritance. I will not apologize for the century in which it was written, only for how some of you have chosen to weaponize it. Anticipating quarrels, I moved the bulk of my personal assets outside the trust years ago so my wishes, rather than any man's purity test, would stand. Arthur turned a page. The wax seal crackled like a log in a fireplace. Reed, I have called you son because you were, in every way that mattered, my son. But your conduct toward Marina, and toward your brother, has revealed a hunger that devours the hand that feeds it. You have preached blood. Very well. By the standard you chose, you inherit only where blood permits. Reed's lips peeled back. This is manufactured. Arthur didn't look up. Julian, the trust assets that require Silas's blood pass to you, and your biological issue Marina by right. See enclosed Schedule A. Marina, what is mine to give, my personal estate, goes where I intended while I lived, to the granddaughter who listened, who learned, who loved this family's history enough to save it from men who only wanted to sell it. See Schedule B for bequests and endowments in your name. To Evan and Miles, you are not punished for your father's choices. You will receive the holdings I specified for you, contingent on your independence from Reed's legal maneuvering. Be your own men. I raised you better than to be anyone's enforcers. Arthur's eyes flicked to Colby. Finally, to those who think the law is a chessboard. I know where the pieces were hidden. Mr. Pennington is authorized to introduce documents others tried to bury. He folded the letter with the ceremony of a verdict. The silence was cathedral deep. Arthur produced a second packet. Adoption records. Independent certification. An affidavit from Dr. Claremont, now deceased, attesting to Isolde's knowledge at the time. Your petition to delay the reading, Mr. Harrington, is denied. By me and, if needed, by any court that still respects probate. Colby blanched, finding nowhere safe to place his eyes. Arthur, let's be reasonable. What you call reasonable I call concealment, Arthur said mildly. Your firm had these records for weeks. Reed surged to his feet, hands braced on the table like he might flip it. You promised. He snarled at me, the veneer gone, the boy beneath howling. You said only blood relatives deserve the fortune. I met his fury with the one thing he never understood, stillness. No. You said that. I asked if you would keep your word. He lunged for the documents. Arthur moved a fraction. Evan's hand shot out, palm on Reed's sleeve. Dad, Evan said, voice low and shaking. Don't. Reed stared at his son as if he'd spoken in a language no Ashbourne had ever used. Refusal. Arthur resumed, unbothered. Per Isolde's instructions and the trust's terms, distribution is as follows. Trust assets, Schedule A vest to Dr. Julian Ashbourne and by bloodline, to Marina Ashbourne as contingent beneficiary. Personal estate, Schedule B, a majority of Isolde's liquid holdings in real property, vests primarily in Marina Ashbourne, with specific bequests to Evan and Miles, and charitable endowments in Isolde's name. Mr. Reed Ashbourne receives legacy items specified by Isolde, family correspondence, a portrait, and the cottage at Wren Lake, none of which are divisible or saleable for 5 years. Reed laughed, a sound like glass in a garbage disposal. A portrait? A cottage under lock and key? You expect me to accept consequences? I said. Yes. Colby dragged a hand down his face, calculation curdling into dread. Arthur wasn't finished. In addition, Arthur said, Isolde directed me to make the following statement on the record. Mr. Harrington, you were aware of Reed's adoption records and failed to disclose them while advocating exclusion of Marina on blood grounds. Consider this your notice that the estate will file a complaint with the bar. Colby's composure cracked. Arthur. Don't bother, Julian said quietly. You chose your client. You forgot your ethics. The room held for a heartbeat on the edge of something irreversible. Then Reed snapped the thread. This isn't over. He spat, pointing at me like I'd crawled out from under his shoe. I will bury you in motions. I will appeal until your hair is gray. You can try, I said. But you don't have the one thing you've demanded from everyone else. What's that? He sneered. Standing, Julian answered, calm as winter. By your own test. Reed's gaze ricocheted around the room looking for a friendly shore and found only driftwood. He shoved back his chair so hard it gouged the floor, and stormed out with the gracelessness of a man who's never had a door close on him without someone to reopen it. Colby followed, a ruined planet circling a dead star. No one spoke. Then Miles, who had been silent so long I'd forgotten he could be loud, exhaled like a confession. I'm sorry, he said to me, eyes bright, voice rough. I didn't see it. Any of it. Evan nodded, jaw working. You've always been our sister, he said, simple as a table set for three. That doesn't change. It landed inside me with the quiet weight of truth. Thank you, I said, and meant it. My mother squeezed my fingers under the table. I should have told you, she whispered, grief and relief braided in her voice. I thought I was protecting you. Maybe I was protecting my younger self from the mess I made. You protected me as best you knew how, I said. We survived long enough to get to this room. Arthur adjourned the reading and everyone drifted out like ships leaving fog, murmuring in the hallways where portraits of stern men pretended not to listen. The house settled around us, older than our mistakes, patient as stone. Later, in Isolde's study, our study now if paper and wood can pass for inheritance, Julian and I sat surrounded by artifacts I could catalog by touch. The silver letter opener, the brass magnifier, the little crack on the desk where Isolde once slammed it with laughter. Dusk gathered at the windows. For once we didn't rush to fill it. What will you do? Julian asked. No physician tone this time. Just a father trying a word on his tongue. Build something new, I said. Restore what's worth saving. Retire what isn't. I'll endow the preservation work Isolde dreamed about. We can fund grants in her name. And we can take a walk without pretending we're just aunt and niece at Thanksgiving. He smiled, and in that smile I saw the genealogy chart redraw itself in real time. I'd like that very much. We talked until the dark came in softly and the lamps threw small, golden circles on the rug. Stories tumbled. The first time he held a pipette, the time I climbed the East Oak and refused to come down, the way Isolde forgot to enforce curfews when books were involved. We traded years we hadn't had for stories we suddenly did. And somewhere in the middle I realized I was breathing like I hadn't in days, maybe years, like oxygen had finally remembered me. I walked the corridors alone after he left, touching banisters polished by hands with my name and hands without it. In the library, I paused before Silas Ashbourne's portrait, wolfish certain, eyes that looked like they believed in nothing but math and men. We're keeping the history, I told him quietly. We're losing the mythology. The next morning the lawyers called, the accountants called, the cousins called, the press tried. I made coffee in Isolde's chipped blue mug and let the house hum. Evan and Miles sent a group text that began "We love you" and ended with "Wren Lake fishing trip?" I said yes. Mom sent a photo of me at 6, asleep on a book bigger than my torso. Julian sent a single line. "Lunch, not as your uncle." I said yes to that too. As for Reed, he filed 2 motions. Both died on contact with the record. He sent 3 texts, I answered none. He had made a vow to the altar of blood, and then found he had nothing to tithe. That was his tragedy. It wasn't mine to fix. Isolde had left me assets, yes. Houses and holdings and a fortress of paper. But what she really left was a structure no trust could contain. A clean hinge, a door that opened forward. She had arranged justice so I wouldn't have to swing the sword. Only step aside and let gravity do what gravity always does. In the end, Reed didn't lose to me. He lost to his reflection. And me? I gained a father who wanted me, not a daughter who looked good on a chart. I gained the right to call the past what it was and the future what I decide. I stood at the study window, watched the maples throw red on the lawn, and felt the house settle around me. Not a cage, not a museum, but a home. An Ashbourne makes her own path, Isolde used to say. Fine. Watch me.